Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I'm Charlie Smith, the Executive Director of ESIG. I want to welcome you to our ESIG monthly webinar for September and give you a little bit of background on ESIG. For those of you not familiar with ESIG, we're a membership-based nonprofit organization providing our members with objective information, resources, and networking opportunities in support of the energy transition. We do this through workshops, tutorials, webinars, blogs, working group and task force activities, and producing technical resource materials. I also serve in a leadership role with the Global Power System Transformation Consortium, the GPST, whose mission is to bring together key actors to catalyze a rapid, clean energy transition at unprecedented scope and speed. ESIG leads Pillar 1 of the 5 pillars, which deals with the research agenda for the system operators. More information on the GPST can be found at globalpst.org. After our 2 in-person special topic workshops in Denver in June on grid forming inverters and meteorology and markets, we're now completing preparations for our fall technical workshop and working group meetings. These will be held in Minneapolis during the week of October 24th and will be in person as well, although registration will be capped at 120. Further information is available on our website. Our workshops and monthly webinars are open to everyone, so please feel free to register anytime on the ESIG website. If you're new to ESIG, I strongly encourage you to follow up with us if you like what you hear, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. ESIG membership will give you an opportunity to participate actively in all of our working groups and task forces. You can find us on the web at esig.energy, as well as on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Okay, just a few logistical matters before we get started. First of all, phones will be muted for the duration of the webinar to avoid unnecessary distractions. For the Q&A, we're using the Slido platform. So to ask your questions, please go to slido.com and enter ESIG29 as the event code. The instructions are also at the bottom of the screen. You'll see a thumbs up button next to the questions to allow you to cast a vote to help prioritize the questions submitted. We plan to save 10 minutes or so for Q&A at the end and then wrap it up at the top of the hour. An email with a link will be provided once the video file has been posted. We also plan to provide short responses to unanswered questions after the webinar, so please don't be afraid to ask your questions through Slido. Okay, today's topic is on offshore energy islands. As you may have noticed, Europe has some very ambitious offshore wind targets, roughly 400 gigawatts, and Denmark has some very ambitious decarbonization plans. And offshore wind is going to play a major role in achieving both. Here to talk with us about it today is Nicolaos Cutululis, a professor for offshore wind power integration at the Technical University of Denmark, or DTU. And I have to say, I don't say Nicolaos' last name too often, and I think you can figure out why. Nicolaos is a busy guy. He's involved with a whole lot of really interesting things at the European level, which you can read more about in the webinar announcement. I've known Nicolaos for about 10 years, and he's a very thoughtful and energetic person. Nicolaos is a member of the IEA Wind Task 25 activity on integration of high shares of wind into power systems, which is where I first met him. He's a member of the GPST core team and research agenda group of Pillar 1 and participates in ESIG technical activities. We work with a lot of the same people and have 255 shared connections on LinkedIn. Nicolaos, maybe we've known each other for more than 10 years, I'm not sure. Anyway, Nicolaos is a good friend and a good friend of ESIG, and it's a pleasure to have him here with us today. Today's webinar will give an update on the status of the development of energy islands in Northern Europe. To facilitate a cost-effective connection of massive amounts of offshore wind power, Denmark is revolutionizing the grid connection concept for offshore wind. In 2020, the Danish Parliament announced plans to develop 2 energy islands, one on the natural island of Bornholm in the Baltic Sea, and a second as an artificial island in the North Sea. Other countries have announced similar plans to build their own energy islands. This webinar will address the challenges as well as the innovation opportunities that come with these massive infrastructure projects. I greatly value the contributions of Nicolaos to ESIG and the industry, and I look forward to what he has to say. Just a short reminder once again to use Slido at slido.com with the event code of ESIG29 to ask your questions. Okay, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Nicolaos, I will now turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Charlie. And after the traditional, can you hear me and can you see my screen? Assuming that both are true.
Yeah.
I want to say good evening or good afternoon to everybody, and thank you very much for the very, very nice introduction and for the opportunity to come here today and try to give an update or discuss a bit about the experiences that we had with offshore wind in Europe and the trends and the opportunities that this trend brings. So I'll try to go a bit through the status of offshore wind in Europe, but also talk about the grid connection concepts of offshore wind. Try to say how what was the journey that we had to go through getting towards this energy island developments, and then I will from the many activities and innovations that are currently going on around here, I'll try to focus on two of them related to the wind turbines and plants when connected to energy islands, and maybe tell you how Bornholm could not be only the first energy island in the world, but also how it can foster innovation and further developments. So when we talk about offshore wind in Europe, we are basically discussing of an installed capacity of around 30 gigawatts. I think by now the number is maybe a bit updated because things are still developing, but 30 gigawatts of wind offshore is more or less a bit over 10% of the onshore wind installed in Europe. So in terms of installed capacity, it's not that high, at least not compared to onshore wind, and it is really a quite regional and localized business for now, as you can hopefully see on the map that virtually all offshore wind installed today is in the North Sea, and it's belongs to basically 5 countries around the Northern Sea. But the developments, and as you know, and I'll get back to that in a minute, the ambitions and the expectations are going much beyond that. If we look, and I know this is not a thing that would be very useful in an online presentation, but I still like to show this map because it shows the existing projects, but more importantly, it shows in dark blue the future wind farms that are under planning or different stages of permitting and planning in the northern seas in Europe, or also you can see that we start appearing in the southern part in the Mediterranean and the other seas. But if we focus a bit on the northern seas in Europe, we can see that all the dark blue dots on the map are becoming to be further away from shore. Yeah, we have a lot of dots. You can see a lot of dots of other colors which were quite close to the shore, but now we are moving gradually further and further away from the shore. And not only that, we are not only moving further and further away from the shore, but we can also see a very, very markant or very important increase in the installed capacity for the projects. We see the average size of commercial wind farms that were constructed in a given year in Europe starts from very low in the beginning of 2000s, and now it reaches around 600 megawatts. So we are really getting towards very, very, very large projects, and you can see that the increase is very sharp in the last few years. The same as I was saying about the distance. If we see the rolling average, we see that already in 2019 we were reaching a distance from shore of around 60 kilometers or 40 miles, more or less, I think. So we see that the tendency is general to go much larger, much bigger wind farms, also further away from shore. And of course, this, as I guess you know, or you can imagined has an impact on the technology used for the grid connection and the transmission on offshore wind to the shore. But coming back to the ambitions, as I said, right now we have a relatively modest installed capacity of offshore wind, especially if we compare it to the onshore wind. But in the last period, if I could have a graph like the previous one is related to the ambitions or the plans for offshore wind, you will have an even more pronounced or steep increase. You can have an example of that only just before summer. We had the North Sea Summit, which was hosted in Denmark, with a representation of the highest level from a few of the countries around the North Sea: Denmark, Germany, Netherlands, and Belgium, together with the president of the European Commission, where they discussed and they agreed to have a target of 150 gigawatts by 2050 for offshore wind. This is again the target only for those 4 countries, which if we add the expected 100 gigawatts from UK and 40 gigawatts from Norway, we already reach a number which is one order of magnitude higher than what we have today. And of course, you have the intermediate targets, which are 65 gigawatts by 2030. This is more than double what we have today. So in what, 7 years from now, we want to double the installed capacity and then at 150 gigawatts by 2050. But this is not the end of it, because just a couple of weeks ago, we had another North Sea Summit where we had not only more countries than in the previous one, but we even had the first landlocked country in Europe, Luxembourg, that is co-signing or is pledging, participating in the pledge of developing offshore wind. And here you can see that the numbers are increasing again. I think we are already reaching 260 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2050, again without UK being included in that number. And as you probably know, UK is the leading country in terms of installed capacity and in terms of ambitions as an individual country. So we are reaching very, very, very high numbers or ambitions or targets for developing offshore wind. And all this was only about the North Sea Summit. But in August, we also had a Baltic Sea Energy Security Summit, which happened in August this year, where we had the countries around the Baltic Sea, Denmark, of course, and Germany, that have also access to that part, but also the Baltic countries, Poland, Sweden, and so on. And the same, it was for the first time that targets were announced, official targets were announced for offshore wind in the Baltic Sea, this time only by to 2030, and what would seem a relatively modest, just shy of 20 gigawatts of offshore wind. But please keep in mind that this is compared to what we have today, 2.8 gigawatts. So this is actually it's a 7-fold increase from what we have today for the Baltic Sea, which I think in many ways it's even more ambitious than for the North Sea. And in total, I think the Baltic Sea it's also expected to play a fundamental or a very large role in the future development of offshore wind, with a potential reaching up to 100 gigawatts. So at least in terms of ambitions and targets, it's a very good period in Europe. I kind of joke saying that I have given up updating my slides related to those targets, because they seem to change every week, to increase every week. And that, of course, it's understandable, and it is very positive, because of course we need to move, and we need to move very fast, and offshore wind has a very large potential and a very large role to play in the decarbonization. Now, talking a bit more technical, coming to the grid connection concepts of offshore wind, I think we have basically 2 options. First of it is the high voltage AC alternating current connection. And here you can see a depiction of the main components of such a grid connection system. We have the collection system inside the wind farm. the cables that will collecting the electricity produced by the wind turbines, and then they will carry that to the offshore AC substation where it will be then moved to the shore through the export cable and then injected to the main AC network. It's basically simple, well-known, and used for a long period of time. And as you would expect for these distances and levels of power, we need to increase the voltage quite a bit, so we can reach quite high voltage levels, especially for the export part. Then the second main concept is using high voltage direct current, which it has the same basic topology in the balance of plant in part of the offshore wind farm with AC connection, both collector system and then the transmission to the converter station. But then the difference is that, of course, if we want to transfer the electricity in direct current, we need to convert it from AC to DC. This is done by the offshore converter station. Then it is transmitted through DC cables. Then, of course, when we get to shore, we need to convert it back to AC and inject it into our AC systems. So two main technologies to use that, and one of the main question would be when to use which. The standard answer would be, of course, distance. We move to DC transmission when we think that the distance from shore, or the distance over which we need to transport that electricity is becoming too large and maybe cumbersome for AC cable systems. But if we look at what is going on today, or what will be the experiences or the stages that we've been through in connecting and developing offshore wind in Europe, we can see that again we have the high voltage AC concept, which it is the most used. That I think the vast majority of offshore wind farms today are connected through this concept. But then we also have a few projects which use a different concept or a similar concept, but high voltage AC with compensation. Because as I said before, at some point we say that AC technology cannot function anymore, cannot provide the stability that we need or the capacity to transfer power. But this is partially true, and it's true as long as we don't compensate it. If we compensate it, this can the distance over which we can use AC technology for offshore transmission can change dramatically. And funnily enough, this HVAC with compensation was the connection that was used for the very first gigawatt scale offshore wind farm ever built in the world. And this is the Hornsea 1 wind power plant, which is connected in the UK, in the east coast of UK. As I said, you can see here, I don't want to go too much into the details of that, but you can see that the connection of it, we have the offshore part, we have the onshore part, and then the platform in the middle, the main midpoint compensation, which is a platform dedicated to shunt reactors or other devices used or units used for compensation. And with this setup, the total export, the distance for the total export cables, it has reached around 170, 190 kilometers. So basically, this project is kind of destroying our argument that distance is the deciding factor for choosing between AC and DC technology, showing that there is also something in between. And this is AC with midpoint compensation. And I think that the second wind farm in the same project, Hornsea 2, is going to be built using the same approach by the same company, Ørsted. In Denmark, they will still use this midpoint compensation to connect the offshore wind to shore. Now, if we move to the HVDC part, we had a number of projects that used HVDC technology to connect offshore wind, all of them in the northern Germany, and all of them That happened, I think, more or less a decade ago. So we have a relatively limited number of wind farms connected by HVDC, and all of them in the North Sea. But then we also have a unique, one-of-a-kind project, the Kriegers flag, which is the combined grid solution, and I will get back to it in a minute. So to follow the same pattern as in the HVAC, if we look at the HVDC transmission, again, it's a bit it's a single line diagram of a potential project of 1.2 gigawatts, where we have 3 clusters, each one of them of 400 megawatts, which are then connected to the offshore station and then to the HVDC. So the offshore part, the electrical infrastructure in the offshore wind is the same as in the HVAC connection. We have still AC technology, AC cables collection, and so on. And then we connect to the HVDC converter. Then we have to the transmission to shore, and then the conversion back to AC. In some ways, this is a bit simpler in terms of auxiliary equipment and the needs for compensations. But of course, we do have 2 very large extra units, which are the HVDC converter stations, both offshore and onshore. But again, I think interestingly enough, coming back to the topic of the distance from shore, one of the hybrid HVDC connection that has been built and it's been operating for a few years now, I think already, is the Kriegers flag combined grid solution, because it was, and it's called combined because it's connecting, of course, offshore wind to the shore, but at the same time it's connecting 2 countries, it's connecting 2 markets, then Danish and German, but it's also connecting 2 synchronous areas, because the part of Denmark, the one in the east part of Denmark, is part of synchronous areas, the Nordic synchronous areas, while Germany is part of the large European synchronous areas. And for this connection, it was used a combination of AC and DC technology. We have AC technology connecting the wind farms, a couple of them on the Danish side and a couple of them, Baltic 1 and 2, on the German side. So they are in AC technology. They are connected through HVAC to Denmark and Germany, respectively. Interestingly enough, we even have different voltage levels in the offshore networks, to 220 kVs for the Danish one and 150 kVs for the German one. But then, of course, since, as I said, this is connecting 2 different synchronous areas, they had to have a place where they will break the AC connection or the synchronous between those 2 areas. And this is done by using an AC/DC back-to-back converter onshore. And this converter is not only used for, as I said, to ensure that, or to break the connection between 2 different synchronous areas, but is also used as a master controller in the whole system, because of course converter is one of the most flexible and controllable units. And then, if you want, one can say that even when we are looking at a very short distances, I think the distance from shore here is around 15-20 kilometers for the Danish side and around 30 kilometers for the German side. So inside the range where AC technology will have absolutely no problem. But for other reasons and for controllability, we also have DC technology. I guess what I'm trying to say here is that there is not, we have tried, or we are trying, and we're still developing different concepts and different ways of connecting offshore wind to shore. And I think in principle this is very good, because this is a developing area, an area where we need to learn more, to understand more, and try different solutions. Now, if we move from these connections, which are basically all of them point to point to more developed, more advanced infrastructure, offshore grids or islands or hubs, whatever you want to call them, we will see, coming back a bit to the ambitions. We have here numbers which may be a bit different from the previous one. As I already told you, I have given up updating the slides still we are talking about very large numbers. But if we try to look how we're going to connect this, and we do a very simple exercise of trying to connect 200 gigawatts in the North Sea with assuming that we have 5 gigawatt links, which we don't have today, but assuming that we have there and try to draw these lines on the map, we will get something like that. Of course, this is, as I said, is an exercise, but I think it also illustrates how complex it will look, or how it looks if we continue to use point-to-point connection. And of course, the same for the Baltic Sea with 80 or 90 gigawatts connections, which are the ambitions. And it is becoming, I think, obvious that this way of connecting offshore wind cannot continue. So we need to move to DC grids, or we need to move to a different way of connecting offshore wind. And in that, I think in that part, HVDC technology will play a crucial role, but not only for connecting this offshore wind power plants or wind farms to the grid, but also helping evacuating further. Yeah, because at the end of the day, we don't only want to bring all this production to shore, but we want to inject it further into the AC systems and into the nodes. And when we talk about HVDC connections or technology, because it is relatively new technology, but we already have quite a bit of those connections in the northern seas. Some of them already existing. I think the solid lines in this, again, a bit messy slide or drawing, but we also have quite a few of planned connections, all with the dotted lines. Are in different stages. Some of them would never happen. Some of them will happen. That's not I'm not trying to show a blueprint or how the future will look like, but I'm trying to show that we have so many cables literally crossing each other through the North Sea, but we are still staying with a paradigm of connecting point to point from point A to B, like this connection between UK and Denmark, even if it literally passes through areas where offshore wind will be developed. And as I say here, this is for only 28 gigawatts of offshore wind. If we try to maintain that for the ambitions that we have, this will look much more messy, I would say. So I think it's becoming very clear that we need to change the paradigm towards multi-terminal offshore grids or hubs or islands, or more centralized infrastructure offshore. And of course, I think this is really the background where energy islands came along. Denmark was the first country to decide to move on with these projects, and I think we announced it a couple of years ago that we'll build these two energy islands, one the Baltic Sea and an existing island of Bornholm. And maybe this is the location of this island. It's unfortunately becoming more known to the public these days in the last couple of days with all the security problems that we have with the gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea. But it is an existing island in the Baltic Sea, and then we have the North Sea one, which will be approximately 80 kilometers from the west coast of Denmark. And while the first one is again on an existing island, natural island, the one in the Northern Sea will have to be built, will be an artificial island that will have to be built. And you can see here a rendering of a possible way of building it again. There are only plans. Nobody really knows how it's going to look like, not yet at least. But these are not the only ones. Belgium, Elia, the TSO in Belgium, announced, I think a few months ago, that they will also build an energy island outside their coast, an island which they will expect to have a capacity of around up to 3.5 gigawatts. And this will come as an extension to the first offshore wind energy zone, which they have today. And if this map was not done by the Belgians, but also by the Dutch, we would see that very close, literally next to this area, we have one of the main areas for offshore wind development in the Netherlands. So a very busy area there. And I've always tried to say that even before these projects were officially announced and the decisions to build were taken, the whole concept of a wind power hub was already being developed a few years by the North Sea Wind Power Hub, again, a joint venture between some of the TSOs and the gas system operators in the Northern Sea. So in a way, it's the decision, or it's something that has been discussed for quite some time now. And I say quite some time, of course, I referring to maybe 4 or 5 years, not very long, but still something that was discussed. But things are accelerating now, and we will see by 2030, we will see one in Denmark, but even possibly 2 energy islands already built in the Northern Europe, because I think the one in Belgium, the ambition there is also to build it by 2030. Now, if we come a bit of an update of what's going on, and I think the update partly refers to the fact that a few months ago, in one of the monthly webinars that ESIG is organizing, and they are so interesting for everyone, we had Christian Flütker from the Danish TSO, Energinet, who gave a fantastic presentation on detailing all the challenges, the detailed challenges on the technical parts on how to build those islands. So I decided not to focus so much on the challenges that everybody is discussing about, but try to talk about 2 initiatives or 2 innovations, which I think are interesting and are showing that by doing these developments, not only we're going to build, we're going to accelerate, hopefully, the development of offshore wind, but we can also innovate. And one of it is optimized wind turbines and plants for energy islands, an activity that we are starting now at Technical University of Denmark with in a research project together with other stakeholders, of course. But what is the idea? Well, the main idea, or the main thinking behind it, is that we have, as you probably know, all wind farms or wind turbines and wind parks, wind plants, whatever you want to use the terminology. I'm sorry, I'm not very consistent, but I use those terms interchangeable. So all of the wind power technology, when it's connected on the power system, it has to fulfill the grid codes. And of course, the grid codes are required by the power system operator to ensure a stable operation of the power system. And of course, they are justified, they are needed, because we need to have a secure and stable power system. Unfortunately, we've all had experiences with how big there would be the challenge if the system does not if the system is not reliable and secure. But when it comes to the wind power technology, this a lot of the times often requires additional equipment and even more important, quite a bit additional control systems, and complying with some of the requirements, especially the ones related to reactive power and fault right through, symmetric, balanced, unbalanced faults, require quite sophisticated controls, which have quite an impact on the development of wind power technology. And of course, every single unit that is connecting, facility or generator that is connecting to the system, has to comply with that. And of course, this is today is very justified, because, as I tried to show, especially in Denmark, all wind farms are directly connected to the onshore power system. Denmark today, it's operating a very large number of Hvdc connections, but none of those links is related to an offshore wind project. All of them are related to interconnectors and electricity trading with the neighbors. But by having an energy island, we are really changing the paradigm, because by having these HVDC systems is decoupling it from the onshore system, which basically means that at least seen from a system perspective, the onshore connection, so the point of connection with the system, is done with the onshore HVDC converter. It's done through a converter, which will of course be at least partly responsible for the grid code compliance, because it is the closest one to the point of connection, which also means that the offshore system has quite different characteristics and different needs than the onshore power system. And the idea here is relatively straightforward. if we do that, and if we are changing completely the way we are connecting offshore wind to the shore by connecting it first to a dedicated large infrastructure and then to the traditional onshore AC system, can we change the requirements? Can we look a bit if all the requirements that are there today make sense and are needed, and what would be the impact of removing or changing some of those requirements? What would be the impact in cost savings, reducing them from the offshore wind? But of course, what would be the impact on the other equipment for the connection? Because again, at the end of the day, nobody's suggesting that the generators should not contribute to the stability of the grid, so should not comply with the grid code, but they should do it in a different way. And personally, I'm very excited about this project because I think there is quite some potential there in changing or adapting or optimizing, whatever word you want to use, the way we are building and connecting the offshore wind farms to the energy islands. And now the last point, and I hope I'm in time. Yes, the last point was that another initiative that we have activity is not only to build these energy islands or build them not only for connecting vast amounts of offshore wind, but use them also for innovation and accelerating development and new solutions. So one of the initiatives is to use Bornholm, again the first energy island on the existing island of Bornholm in the Baltic Sea, as a test center for energy island technologies. And why we can do that? Apologies for the figure is in Danish, but it basically says that we have the energy island. It has already a lot of existing infrastructure, and it can be a very accessible de-risk testing of new solutions. Because if you build the artificial energy island in the northern sea, will not have the same accessibility. Will be a dedicated infrastructure offshore, so you still need to go there if you want to do something. While the Bornholm island has already all the infrastructure and all the parts, and it's much more accessible. And then we would like to integrate the local power system as part of the energy island. And here I should say that for many years, Bornholm has been a bit of a living lab. A lot of innovation projects with us, with DTU, and other actors have happened there, both in terms of wind power, a lot of testing of auxiliary services for wind power, onshore wind turbines there have been tested, but also a lot about smart systems, EV charging, and in general, it's a place where innovation is very welcome. So why not use Bornholm as a test center, because they can be tested very close to a real environment, and that's why we are trying to develop a dedicated test center that will be embedded in the energy island infrastructure. How we will do that? Just an illustration of that, and please don't take this as an indication of how the electrical infrastructure for the energy island of Bornholm would look like. I don't think this has been yet announced by the Danish TSO. I think it will happen soon, but it's not been announced. So it's just a description, or just a one possible way of doing it. And we have the offshore wind farms. Then we have their connection to the 400, to the high voltage 400 kV, and then the connection to the Hvdc converters platforms, and then the two connections. At least for now, consider only two connections: one to Zealand in Denmark, one to Germany. But the idea here is to actually also have a connection to the Bornholm energy island, to connect it, to also connect it to their own energy system, but also connect it to the test and demonstration site that we want to develop. And that should be embedded in the infrastructure, because by being an active part or a direct part of this infrastructure, allows to test a lot of technologies, conversion technology, storage technology, power to X conversion technologies, and have them in an environment which is very close which is very connected to a real system. And we think that by doing that, we were allowed to test relevant and operational environments. So having to very high TRL this is maybe a very kind of European invention. TRL means technology readiness level, and it's a scale that goes up to 9 or 10, with 10 being fully commercial, and 8 and 9 being technology that is be ready to commercialize. So by having this, we think we can really advance some of the innovation and the development by, again, allowing to test it in relevant and operational environment. So finally, just to summarize a bit, if I would say the main takeaways, which I hope you got from this presentation, is that our ambitions are really ramping, scaling up in Europe. We are becoming really and truly ambitious in developing that, and we are moving towards very large projects. I think it's becoming quite rare actually to discuss about a new project offshore that it is below a gigawatt scale. And of course, HVDC technology is following very quickly. I think it's quickly ramping up and is very closely related to offshore wind, especially for now. It would be very close relation to offshore wind, but in the future, I think we will see a future where HVDC technology will also be much more present in our onshore system as well. But this is probably a topic for a different presentations. And finally, I think we have to move from the old paradigms of point-to-point connections, and we need to move to something more centralized. Whatever will be that, energy islands or energy hubs is one way of doing it, but also we can have multi-terminal HVDC offshore grids. And this is coming not only with challenges, but also with many opportunities. And I say that we can see in the future wind turbines and plants dedicated. So I call them energy island wind turbines and plants, but also test centers that are attached to it. And I'm sure many more technologies and innovations will follow. So thank you very much, and I hope there is time for some discussion.
Oh, thank you, Nikos. We've got plenty of time for discussion. I was just looking through some of the questions on Slido, and I would like to remind everyone that feel free to ask your questions. There's about a dozen questions in there now, and one of the interesting things is that there's not a lot of voting on the questions. There's about 11 questions, 11 or 12, and they're all about the same level of interest as indicated by the voting right now. So just kind of go through them one at a time. But first, there are a couple of general themes that went through the questions, Nikos. One was a concern or curiosity about the energy islands and just what else was encompassed on the energy islands. I know when Anders gave his presentation, he talked about energy storage and hydrogen, and maybe you could say just a word about some of the grander concepts for energy islands to answer some of those questions.
Yes, I think especially for the one in the North Sea, building an artificial island out there, it's done not only to host the electrical infrastructure, the converters and all the others which are related to the transmission, but also to have energy storage, maybe some fuel conversion, power to X, hydrogen, ammonia, or other fuels, and not least to also host the logistics and the O&M part, the maintenance and logistics related to offshore wind. It's something that is quite tricky and quite complicated, and by being able to have an OEM hub on the onshore island, not only accommodation for the technician, but also hub for the different equipment needed for that, will probably have a big impact on that. So yes, the concept of energy islands, it's going much beyond the infrastructure only for electricity, and should include other parts as well.
Okay, thanks. I think that helps provide some context. It directly addresses one of the questions, and I think provides some context for the overall discussion. Question on costs. I know it's probably kind of hard to answer, but any idea on the differences of costs between the HVAC and the HVDC systems? I guess you'll have to qualify that however you answer it.
Yes, I won't give numbers. I don't really. I don't have access to a lot of numbers. Yes, HVDC technology is much more, it is more expensive than HVAC. I can tell anecdotally, if you want, that one of the anecdotes that circulates that when they first saw the cost estimates for the HVDC connection for Krieger's flag, the one that I showed you, the hybrid one, when the industry leaders saw the first cost estimation, said, "Oh no." So that stopped the discussion there. So HVDC used to be quite expensive, but I think the cost has decreased a lot. The technology is improving very much. So it is reaching today, again, a parity, a point where it is considered a very viable and feasible alternative for grid connection. I think we have, I don't know the number, but I think we have at least five, six upcoming offshore wind farms, which will be HVDC connected in the Northern Sea, which in my opinion just shows that the cost is becoming comparable, or at least the cost benefit analysis is becoming comparable.
Yeah. And you've also got the technical questions associated with distance. How many times can you do compensation? How far off can you go with that? To the point where it's really not feasible anymore, and you need HVDC to reach far away.
Yes, I'm not sure. I think it was this one, the existing wind farm, which operates with a midpoint compensation. It was quite ambitious in itself because we are still talking about very long AC cables. So we don't have only the compensation part, but we have resonances, stability issues, challenges. So probably doing that once more will the problems will become even larger. I think, as far as I know, the second, as I said, the second Hornsea wind farm will be the same with midpoint compensation, but I think the third one, which is there are good chances that it will be with HVDC. So I would expect that at some point, instead of having two midpoint, I mean, they are not called midpoint anymore, no, two whatever points compensations we have in a connection, it will probably make more sense to move to HVDC.
Yeah. Here's a question from Bonnie Ram. Nicolaos, Bonnie's an old friend of mine. She was at a conference a week or two ago that I was at as well, chairing a session, and she's very involved with social acceptance issues for new technologies and making sure that it's done right to gain community acceptance. And she's asking if there's been any engagement with the local communities in Bornholm regarding acceptance of the energy island idea.
There has been, I think, and it's ongoing, and I think he will ramp up, he will scale up. I think this is a part of the discussions with the locals are to show also the benefits that are coming together with that, the added benefits of the ecosystem that is built around it. So as I said, I think Bornholm Island was already an island which was very open to innovation. There are a lot of technical innovations were happening because it's a small system. It's a nice system to play with from a technical perspective. Of course, now we are talking about a very different scale of projects, and the interactions with the consultations with the locals, I think, are ongoing. I don't know a lot of details about that. It's not really my area of expertise, but I know that they are happening and they will only intensify. But I think, from my perspective, it's important to show that all this ecosystem will create an innovation around it. I think DTU, Technical University of Denmark, will already create residential colleges there to have students going out there and spending time and doing innovation. So there are multiple benefits around this development. There are also parts which, there's going to be an impact on the island by building infrastructure, but I think there are also benefits, and I hope that the authorities or the people that know how to do this engagement, they will do it properly, and they will show the people the benefits that are coming with these projects.
Yeah, that's very good to hear. I've heard of the innovations on Bornholm for many years in the different areas. I guess it's mostly on distribution grids and customer side of the meter developments, but it seems like the population there, while it's small, it's a very progressive and forward-looking community, and glad to hear that they're being consulted on this. Question on water depth. Is water depth an issue for the undersea cables? Probably not in the North Sea.
Not in the North Sea, yes. I think it is becoming an issue if we are going to hundreds of kilometers depth. But for the North Sea, I don't think it's a bigger issue in the Mediterranean. But there is also their experience with laying cables in Greece. We have just building a connection or laying, I think, submarine cables at very high depths in the Mediterranean. So not in the North Sea. I don't think this will be a challenge.
Yeah, I remember a project in Hawaii looking at bringing a large import of wind from the big island of Hawaii over to Oahu, and there's a trench because they're volcanic islands. There's a trench between the two islands. It was, I can't remember now, 5,000 feet, I think, and that 5,000 feet was a limiting factor. It was too deep to lay a cable to bring it down and bring it back up. So there's definitely depth considerations, but probably not in the North Sea or the Baltic Sea.
Not there, no.
Yeah. Technical question here. Does Midpoint compensation help with subsea export cable energization? Or does it detract from energization?
As far as I know, they have only passive components there. So I don't think it would definitely. I don't think it would really help with the energization. I think it may make the energization a bit more challenging.
Yeah, it seems like there could be some transient concerns energizing with that capacitor in the middle.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. What grid code compliance need to be followed when connecting the hybrid solution to two different synchronous areas?
I think if we refer to the Kriegers flag, I think each of the wind farms is still technically connected to one country. You know, you have the Danish wind farms and the German wind farms. So each one of them has to comply with the local grid code, the national grid code, the Danish and the German one. And in Europe, we actually have in the last few years there was trying to do harmonization of the grid code. So now we have a grid code requirements for generators, which is developed at EU level, and it's harmonizing to a large extent, not fully, but to a large extent the requirements for all countries in Europe. So at least for now, technically and legally, each wind farm is still connected only to one country, so they have to comply with the grid codes for that country. Now, if the question is going to the detailed requirements, there are quite a few. They have to comply a lot of voltage stability, reactive power, power factor control, frequency control, and so on. There are so many requirements included in the grid code. But I hope I captured the essence of the question.
Yes, I think so. Question on environmental impacts. Is there a view on how to best optimize offshore power systems to reduce or minimize negative environmental impacts? How do you make sure the fish come back after you're all done?
Sorry?
How do you make sure the fish come back after you're all done?
Maritime planning. I think this is also a very big topic in Europe right now, to trying to look again at the planning and how we can have co-use and coexistence, co-use of the space that it's used. But if we talk about environmental impact, I think in general, fewer cables and fewer platforms will have less impact. I think this is, at least from my perspective, is one of the drivers behind having this more centralized kind of infrastructure, because by connecting not only wind but also between countries, we do have a much more efficient utilization of the infrastructure. So in principle, we will have to build less of it, not more. When we have a connection that goes in parallel, a cable between two countries, a cable that connects offshore wind farm to one of the countries, with the capacity factor of the wind power that cables are not utilized fully. So by combining it, we can increase the efficiency and hopefully decrease the impact.
That's a good answer, I think. Another question on economics, Nikos. Again, it may be difficult to answer it. Maybe you can, at least we'll try to address it, and maybe you can give some perspective on it overall. What are the cost comparisons like for building energy islands versus point to point? And what is the project cost for an energy island? I realize you don't have specific numbers on that, but any perspective on that?
Well, I think in Denmark there is an estimated number for building the energy island, which is it's 200 billion Danish kroner. We should divide it by 7 to get euros. So it's 230 billion euros. But it's very hard to do that. I think and what I've heard from people and studies actually that looked at that, an energy island makes sense, or any decentralized infrastructure makes sense for large scales. So for building an artificial island for only a couple of gigawatts of wind, it will not make any sense. Using standard technology will probably be cheaper. But when we're talking about, I think the number I've heard is 6-7 gigawatts and higher, then the economy of scales is changing towards the energy islands. And I think that's why the North Sea one will be at least 10 gigawatts in the longer run to be quite large scale.
Economies of scale. Okay, question on supply chain. With such ambitious targets, will turbine, cable, and DC converter suppliers be able to keep up with demand?
Good question. I think everybody is, all the supply chain is excited about the prospects, but also a bit concerned on how to reach that. And I would think, especially on the DC technology part, on DC converters, because it's a relatively limited number of manufacturers, and I don't think there is a supply chain or capacity productions to be existing to date, because it's only ramping up. And I heard recently some saying that only for the energy island we need to build a factory that will produce cables only for that project for I don't know how many years. So yes, I think supply chain is a concern, is a challenge, but let's see. I think it will be up to the whole industry to ramp up and try to deliver that.
Yeah, let's hope that private industry sees it as an attractive investment and will invest accordingly. The question, looking out towards 2050, any idea what DC voltage level is going to be used out towards the 2050 level as you get looking at a couple hundred gigawatt kind of installations out there?
Well, I think by 2030 we will definitely see 525 kV. I think that there are already projects in planning with 525 kV for DC voltage. Maybe we will be able to go to 800 kV by 2050. I don't know. It's very hard to say, but I don't think it's very unlikely, or it's impossible to see. But I still think that now we have the 320 kV, which is kind of the standard, and there's we will move to the 525 kV. I think for the next period that will become the kind of the standard, if you want, voltage for DC.
Yeah, you have to shine up your crystal ball for us.
This is recorded.
Okay, I think we've answered this question about offshore substations and energy islands. Is an interesting one about networking energy islands. Is there any thought given to creating a separate offshore grid that could serve any nearby onshore grid, like interconnecting the energy islands?
But I think the idea, and I try to convey that, I think the energy islands, there will be more of them. There will be some of the Lego or the bricks to connect them and create a meshed or multi-terminal offshore grid that will then have many connections to shore. So yes, I think the energy islands are really part of this idea to create an offshore grid that will support and contribute to all the onshore grids surrounding it, especially the North Sea one.
Okay. I think I'll take one last question here on losses. What challenges does the fact that the offshore systems are further from shore present in terms of T&D losses?
Well, losses will increase with the distance in the AC systems. Yeah, in the DC, if we move to DC, the losses in the the ones related to the distance will are much less because we have only resistive cables. Yeah, the DC it's only resistive losses, but then of course we have the added losses in the converters. But I think they are becoming more and more efficient. So I hope that the level of losses will not increase significantly with the distance, especially moving to DC technology.
Yeah, the DC a lot. Okay, so we're at the top of the hour, so I think we're going to need to wrap it up. And Nikos, I want to thank you for this really informative webinar, for the great insights into the challenges and opportunities for offshore wind. It's really, really good. As I mentioned earlier, an email will go out once the video file has been posted, and we'll answer the questions we didn't get to and get them posted as quickly as possible. We appreciate your engagement. Look forward to seeing you again soon. I would remind you of our fall workshop coming up the last week of October in Minneapolis, as well as a webinar next Thursday dealing with the very hot topic of resource adequacy. Further information on all of the webinars and meetings can be found on our website at esig.energy under events, and in our newsletters and informational emails, and you're all invited to attend. Nikos, thank you once again for this very timely and informative webinar, and thank all of you for your interest. We look forward to seeing you again in the near future. And in the meantime, everyone, take care, stay safe, and thanks for your participation. See you soon.
Thank you very much.
Take care, Nikos.